Welcome, everyone. We're so excited to have you all here. It's office hours. We're doing these weekly, and now we're switching up things a little bit as of the next third quarter of the year. So I am going to pause my mute myself on the other side because we're streaming live to YouTube. And I'm super excited today to not only welcome my co-host, John Arms. Hey, John.
Hello, hello.
And also Frank Costabilo. Frank has connected up with me via some tried and true methods of smiling and dialing and not being afraid to grind. And so I'm so excited to have Frank here. He's a PR and communications Jedi master, and he's going to tell us some things about how he drives traffic and grows business for the businesses that he works with. Welcome, Frank. How are you?
Thank you. Pleasure being here.
Frank, we're glad to have you.
Yes.
You have on your LinkedIn profile that you've been doing consulting since February of 1996. Is that right?
Absolutely correct. Yes.
Oh my God, that you're like an old timer in this. I mean, that is a serious resume and background. And I mean, the amount of wisdom you have amassed in all that time is very rare. That's awesome to hear. I didn't mean to call you old. I meant to say seasoned.
There you go. There you go. No, definitely. I've certainly got the gray hair to prove it. And with a 17-year-old daughter and a 15-year-old son, there's some more evidence for you. So I've been around the block a couple of times.
You know, I didn't have any gray hair until I had kids. You know, we had our first child. I had not a single strand. And now we have our third. He's in high school. And look at this. Look at that up there, Dave.
It's crazy.
It's ridiculous.
Mine stayed darkish, except for on the sides and down here. But then it just blew right off. So
one big win. It just took one big win. So as we're always trying to do, or what we work on here is we try to open the aperture for fractionals and small biz. And how do you support your business? You know, what are the things you can do, and what aren't you doing? What new information can you learn to grow as a small business or as a fractional professional as you are? So super glad to hear, because the two things Dave talked about is some version of tried and true methods and some version of earned media and how they apply. So I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on that and kind of digging into that a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. No, I was going to say I'm excited to talk about it, and I'll just kind of follow your lead here.
Sure. So Dave, when you guys talked about, tried and true methods, let's start there. Huh? What do you think?
Yeah. So, Frank, and if you want to do any show and tell, Frank, you're welcome to do some screen sharing. And I know you've got some sample videos and some sample like press releases and things that you use. Just explain to us the process that you use to grow your fractional business. Because I thought it was, a lot of people say, well, I'm really trying to grow my business. And, I went to a BNI 4 months ago, and for some reason, I'm not on the Fortune 100 yet. Like, well, you got to do the work. And the coolest part about Frank is, you're especially on the biz dev side for yourself, you're not afraid to just smile, dial, and crush it. And the things that you do also help businesses grow. So I want to hear both sides of that, both how you grow your business and how you help others grow.
Yeah, no, which is certainly great. Obviously, I'm a media and public relations expert. I've been doing this for about 26 years. I'll back up briefly. I graduated from Loras College in Dubuque, Iowa, studied writing and literature, had a minor in philosophy. So I started very early in my interest in communications just in general. Spent about 5 years on the print media side, writing for the Lakeville Life and Times, a small community newspaper in the city of Lakeville. And then about 26 years ago, I threw my hands up in the air and said, you know what, I think I've just got to do this myself. And that kind of got me to the point that I'm sort of at. As it relates to how I grow my business, maybe I'll start there.
Yeah.
I'm a little old school. I'm a firm believer in picking up the telephone. I sort of refer to this as St. Patrick's law, and I'll explain that briefly.
Yeah, I want to hear about that.
If you guys are familiar with your Roman Catholic history, St. Patrick was credited with Catholicizing, if I dare invent a word this afternoon, the entire island nation of Ireland. And the question comes, how did he go about doing that? It was a pretty tall task. There were, I believe, thousands of clans. You had a chieftain, you had warriors, and then you had a variety of subordinates that made up these individual clans. They were warring clans, so they sort of did an awful lot of killing back and forth. And Ireland was a pretty rough ride back in the day of St. Patrick. What St. Patrick discovered is that when he reached out specifically to the chieftain, and if he was successful in converting the chieftain or bringing him to a place of belief in Jesus Christ and the church, then something magical happened. And that magic was the rest of the clan just sort of followed suit. So I refer to this as a salesperson and as an entrepreneur as St. Patrick's rule. And St. Patrick's rule is if you want to sell something to someone, talking to the secretary or the admin or the manager, or sadly, in many cases, the vice president, probably is not going to get you to your goal.
Okay.
So what I've done is I've been quite particular about following St. Patrick's rule, picking up the phone, directly engaging these owners, businesses anywhere from 5 million to 50 million, 10 to 100 employees, initially in the Twin Cities metropolitan area, now throughout the nation. And if you apply St. Patrick's rule, boy, I tell you, you learn an awful lot, not just about business, but about human nature in general. And what I've learned over the last 26 years is, you know, I can spend hours, days, or weeks talking to the vice president, or in some cases talking to the owner's wife until the cows come home. But the reality is, until I have that engaging conversation with that owner and I inspire some level of curiosity in that person, and he demands to learn a little bit more and to take more of his time to discover who I am, what I've learned is that there's an incredible amount of time that is typically wasted by many entrepreneurs who elect of their own volition to violate St. Patrick's rule.
Interesting.
So that's sort of how I've grown. Now, as it relates to what I do and how I use my own skills to promote my own business, obviously my skill set is media relations and public relations specifically. I'm leveraging my college degree and my journalism experience, and then obviously mixing in some of my consulting background to reach out to small businesses, throughout the country. And obviously leveraging the media is something that I'm particularly good at. So whether this is a trade journal or a local, regional, or national newspaper, could be a special interest magazine, could be a radio program, could be a television program. I've done a real good job of leveraging those sources and getting my story in front of dozens, hundreds, thousands, in some cases millions of people, not only for myself, but also for my clients as well. And I guess my message today is the media is really your best friend as a business person. Sadly, the vast majority of business owners elect to turn a blind eye. They don't have any fundamental understanding as it relates to distinguishing between paid media and earned media. And those are two very different animals. And a lot of small businesses believe that to grow their business, they've got to advertise. Well, the reality is advertising is how a business defends an existing brand. Media relations and public relations is how a new company grows its brand by leveraging the media. And again, if I had a nickel for every small business person that got some business documents drafted, got their LLC, started a particular business, started selling, and then reached the conclusion that they needed an advertising agency to help them grow their brand. Well, I've got a newsflash for you. 2, 4, 6, 8 weeks into developing a company, you don't have a brand.
Right. Well, it kind of occurs to me that, advertising and paid media is kind of like the carbs of the business growth world. Like it's that quick fix, it's the sugar. And boy, it'll get you up in the morning. You can hit your can of Red Bull, which is maybe a good boost on Google Ads. But unless you're also eating some of the higher fiber stuff and maybe some protein, maybe getting your veggies in, you're not going to be in it for the long haul. And so you can't build mass, you can't build your business by just popping, pop rocks and slamming Diet Cokes.
As I call tonnage, I was
Yeah.
talking about this earlier this week in a conference, and it was about the same, the balance, right? There's some paid and there's how do you leverage each. And in our market in the Twin Cities, every single day we see tonnage with Chris Lindahl.
Oh, yeah.
Chris Lindahl is you can't escape it, right? He buys media tonnage, and I'm not judging or criticizing his path. I don't know what else is mixed into it, but particularly when it comes to a small business, just relying on tonnage, eyeball tonnage, media tonnage, leaves too much, not just in terms of impressions, but it leaves too much of the story out. And,
Right.
and I want to talk about that with you, Frank, and have you talk about that. But before we do, you brought up two really, really big things, and I want to spend equal time on each. Can you take us back for the benefit of our listeners and all independents, and take us to how you apply the St. Patrick's rule? That's very intimidating for a lot of people. What you're saying is you want to go talk to the CEO of that company, $20 million business, find their number, pick up the phone and call them. Our people could use some guidance on that. That's obviously scary for some people. What do I do? What do I say? To walk me through that a little bit. Help us share that with our population, your St. Patrick. Even though we're a non-denominational organization, we will still use St. Patrick's rule. So can you kind of walk us through that and maybe take some of the fear down on that and put some more meat on the bones there? I would like that.
Yeah. I was going to say, one of the, I guess, fundamental obstacles that I see a lot of young salespeople and certainly young entrepreneurs doing is, just simply talking to the wrong person and kind of delivering the wrong message.
Mm-hmm.
And I think step one is, honoring St. Patrick's rule and making sure that you're talking to the right person. Now, sometimes that can be difficult. I've called companies and I've asked to speak with the president. And well, I'm sorry, the president isn't in, but my name is Jerry. I'd be happy to talk to you. Well, at that moment in time, you've got a decision to make. And the decision you have to make is it now worth your time to speak with Jerry, who isn't the owner? And I would argue, in most cases, that's a complete and utter waste of time.
Mm-hmm. What do you say then?
And well, I just say that from the perspective that throughout my career, I've had numerous instances where I've asked to speak with the president. Well, I'm sorry, he's not in, but I'm actually the vice president of the organization. I'd be happy to entertain your call. And I've rolled the dice. Basically, I violated St. Patrick's rule. And I said, okay, you know what? I'd be happy to share this with you. I'd share a particular concept, whether it's media-based or something related to earned media as it relates to helping that organization elevate their awareness and grow. Mm-hmm. And in some cases, these vice presidents get very excited about it. Maybe they have a background in PR. They ask for additional information. Our owner's currently on vacation in Hawaii, but he'll be back in about 2 weeks. Frank, I think it sounds like a great idea. I'm going to talk to George for you. Why don't you call back in a couple of weeks? Now, a novice salesperson, a novice entrepreneur would get pretty excited about that interaction. Obviously, hey, you know what? I asked for the president. I got redirected to the vice president. I rolled the dice. I violated the rule. I spoke with the vice president at length. He was quite engaging, quite interested, requested information, asked me to call back. I marked my calendar. I call back in a couple of weeks. And it turns out that in spite of all of the enthusiasm that the vice president expressed, George has decided that he's just not interested in pursuing earned media at this time. Thanks for following up, Frank. I've done this for 26 years, and the conclusion I've come to is my time is much better spent focusing on conversations with owners rather than it is, rolling the dice and spending quality time talking to effectively subordinates, even if that subordinate is the vice president of a particular firm. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not implying that we should be disrespectful or rude, But I'm just saying that, your time is really of the essence here. And in my humble opinion, if you're not sticking hard and fast to St. Patrick's rule, 9 times out of 10, you're talking to the wrong person.
Totally get it. Understand the strategy. Makes perfect sense, right? Now let's get our feet on the ground here, Frank. Take me through a call. You're prepared for that call. What are you going to say? Let's share how you go forward when the CEO picks up. Share a little bit about how that goes.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to say I would make a call. Hey, is President Jerry Stein in? I'll just make up a fictitious.
My old friend Jerry.
Exactly. Yes, Frank, as a matter of fact, Jerry just got in. I'll be happy to transfer the call. This is Jerry. Hey, Jerry, Frank Costabilo calling with Frank Costabilo Consulting. I'm actually a local consultant out of St. Paul. I just wanted to politely follow up. I've got about 26 years of experience in the media relations space. And I was just curious if you would have any interest in a program that would get dozens, hundreds, potentially thousands of your clients and prospects just simply reading and learning more about your business.
Mm-hmm.
Bang. That question is going to immediately elicit a response. And in many cases, the response is, Frank, I'm sorry, we have an internal marketing vehicle at ABC Company here. I think we've got our bases covered.
Mm-hmm.
And in that scenario, typically I'll ask a couple of follow-up questions. I'll say, hey, Jerry, I completely respect that. I was just curious, at this point in time, would you have any interest in an objective third party that would survey your client satisfaction with the work that you're currently doing,
Mm-hmm.
and then develop some case studies and client testimonials that would help you illustrate the outstanding work you do? Well, Frank, I'll be honest with you. We ran that program for a couple of years. We sort of got distracted, and we haven't done it for a while. You know what? I'm open to that. Do you have some information that you might be willing to share? As a matter of fact, I'd be happy to share some information. I've just got one more question for you, Jerry, then I'll politely go back to the second question here. I was curious, at this point in time, would you be open to either updating or revising your existing website or potentially building a brand new one? Oh, well, Frank, it's funny that you posed that question. 2 weeks ago, I had to let our web architect go. We typically have done this in-house for many years. I just wasn't happy with his performance, and we're kind of on scramble mode here. We do need not one site, but actually 3. Could you do me a favor? Could you send some information and maybe give me a call back tomorrow at 2:00? I'd like to talk to you about the web stuff. And then you mentioned, what was that program called? Oh, the Client Satisfaction and Loyalty Program. Yeah, feel free to share some of that. Let's do a quick follow-up because I know we have some pretty sincere web needs right now. So the idea here is to not just engage the right party, but to pose some stimulating, probing questions that demand a response other than either yes or no.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is, if you can do that, inevitably you'll get the answer that you're sort of searching for. And it's not always a yes. You'll hear the word no many times. But again, I think the key here is talking to the right person, following St. Patrick's rule,
Mm-hmm.
coupled with understanding how to ask these probing questions and being able to read the actual call. When I ask these probing questions, it isn't just the words coming out of someone's mouth. It's the cadence of their voice.
Mm-hmm.
It's the language used. It's the tenor. It's the tone. There's all of these other qualities in their response that tells me exactly what I need to know as it relates to, hey, do I continue to push here or do I go on to my next call?
Right.
So I think at the granular level, that's the strategy that I've used. And it's provided a 6-figure income for me for the last 26 years. So I have to believe I'm probably doing something right.
We're certainly onto a dimension. Let's kind of, a lot of people wonder about the math in all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And can you give us an idea in terms of at least how that your St. Patrick's rule has worked for you? How many of those phone calls do you make in a month and how many turn into something that is a business relationship?
Yeah, I would say that, I try to make anywhere from, say, 100 to 150 calls per day. I don't know exactly what the math on that is. I'd have to get a
Did you say
calculator
100 to
out.
150 per day?
Correct, yep.
Okay.
And generally speaking, I'll get anywhere from maybe 8 to 10 leads per week. And on a conversion basis, I'll ultimately convert maybe 1 or 2.
Mhm.
So like most businesses, you've got that kind of inverse pyramid, so to speak. You have to make a fair number of calls to get that interest level. And then ultimately, those interested parties, most of them will find a creative excuse to not move forward.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then typically 1 or 2 will say, you know what, Frank, I'm really glad you called. This represents a sincere need. And I think you've presented yourself well. We'd like to give this a shot.
For sure. And I think, Frank, the target market that you're going after is probably similar to a lot of the folks that are dialed into the webinar, kind of established businesses that have a need and that you can come in and help on. How do you find 150 to 200 folks a day to
Yeah,
call?
I was going to say, essentially, I target specific verticals.
Mhm.
I'll give you one example. I target architects specifically. I've done well with them. I can maybe give you another example.
Sure.
I do quite well with engineers as well. So I try to target specific verticals. I want to get a company that has some discretionary income. Obviously, contacting a lemonade stand for the work that I do is probably a waste of everybody's time. Equally so, if I reach out to 3M, the reality is 3M doesn't have one Frank Costabilo working for them. They've got 300 Frank
Right.
Costabilos working for
Mhm.
them.
Mhm.
So obviously, reaching out to the Fortune 500 crowd, in my estimation, can be difficult, not impossible, but certainly difficult. So for me, it's that 10 to 50 million, maybe 5 million, but realistically 10 to 50 million, 10 to 100 employees. Again, in a firm that has some discretionary income, and in particular, the profile of a company that is in a position to compete for business with other similar firms. So case in point, if you're calling on a vertical that gets most of their work, either word of mouth or through responding to RFPs, well, the reality is media and public relations would only have a nominal impact on their business. On the other hand, if these organizations are in a position where they have to make a substantial investment in marketing because they're literally competing head to head with similar firms, in that scenario, it's much more likely that there would be an interest or a need for media. So that's how I've done things sort of historically here.
How many hours a day, or how long does it take you to make 100 calls per day?
It really depends upon whether or not I'm talking to the right people. I can do 150 calls in less than 2 hours if I'm just not hitting anyone. Or sometimes I never get to make 150 calls because the reality is I'm having wonderful conversation after wonderful conversation with these key decision makers. And as a result of that, I'm not able to hit my numbers, so to speak.
Okay.
So there's
Which is
some,
fine because you're
Yeah.
having the rich conversations that you're doing this for.
yeah. The key behind the strategy is building meaningful relationships.
Mhm.
And you can text message someone if you want. You can send them an email. You can send them a mailer. You can meet them at a trade show. You can do some networking. There's a variety of different ways to meet people. You can engage in the usage of social media. That's all fine and dandy. But when the smoke clears, at some point there has to be a conversation between two people that sparks a relationship. And obviously, I think there's tremendous value to media and public relations work. The idea of putting a press release out, getting published in print, radio, and television, and ultimately getting an objective third party to sing the praises of your product and or services. That's really the hallmark, the value, if you will, of media relations work.
Yeah.
That's all very effective, but it starts with a relationship. And the question then becomes, how much of your time as an entrepreneur are you hyper-focused on building relationships? And if your strategy is to rely exclusively on email as an example, or exclusively on networking as an example, or exclusively on social media as an example, there's nothing inherently wrong with any one of those strategies. But at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, I'll use social media as an example, how many relationships have been sparked over the last week by your reliance and application on social media specifically?
Yeah.
And if the answer is none, I would argue that it's probably time to pick a different lure to fish with. That's my thought.
Our guest last week, Patty Radford Henderson, she's with Annam Planning, and she was talking about omni-channel, which is hugely important. You're never going to catch everybody in one place. Nobody lives and exists in one place. So having calling, email, social media, physical networking, having a cadence around the right mix is critical. And she had a really great tool about omni-channel and how to manage it. I don't think often people call, here's what's interesting about you, Frank, is if you think about I don't know, I shouldn't say traditional anymore because everything's normal, right? But there's things in an omni-channel plan that are they're easier to get your arms around, right? Like I can open up HubSpot or the monkey thing, MailChimp or whatever, and dump emails in there, and I can start using email, right? And I don't mean to say dump, like be thoughtful. I can go out and post on social media. You have kind of complete control over that. You can activate it pretty easily and pretty quickly. A little harder, I think, is PR. I think it's a little harder because if I decide I want to be, talk about, if I'm Dave and I want to talk about web design, because that's over his right-hand shoulder, he can have content or information out there like this minute on that. In order to do it, though, with earned media, that's not as easy. It belongs in omni-channel, but it executes differently and it measures differently. Can you share a little bit about how that PR and earned media fits into the small business? What are ways that they can do it that maybe isn't so complicated?
Yeah, I was going to say, certainly just as a nuts and bolts sort of exercise, if you're an entrepreneur and you're not either putting out a press release at a minimum once per month and getting that strategically placed in local, regional, and national newspapers, trade journals, and magazines, you've really sort of handcuffed yourself as an entrepreneur. The reality is earned media develops celebrity. And let me give you an example. You're familiar with a lot of the home improvement guys. Pick any one that you want. It doesn't really matter. But the reality is these guys start out with a YouTube channel, and that graduates into a television program. And sometimes it leads into a TV series or a movie or a book or whatever it might be. And at some point, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, eventually millions of people know who this person is, what they do. And not in every case, but in many cases, there's a degree of reverence and respect that's associated with that particular person. And as a small business person, you look at that and you ask yourself, well, now, wait a minute. How did this guy go from a YouTube channel, to a television series, to a book, to a public speaker, to a movie, to appearing at a national association meeting as a guest speaker? I mean, this guy, has done amazing things. Where did that all start? Well, it started with earned media. It started with a relationship. It started with getting other people to sing your praises. And the reality is, if you can get enough people to say, wow, you know what? I listened to that Frank Costabilo. He was a rather intriguing fellow, had a lot of great insights and ideas. And he's coming out with a book, and he'll be a guest speaker at a trade association downtown Minneapolis next month. When you get to that point, you walk into the grocery store and people start noticing you.
My favorite one is the Treehouse guys. Speaking of that, That
Yeah.
freaking gets me. I mean, and you're right. You know, everybody starts as a busker,
Mhm.
and that's I think that's something that the Beatles said. I think it was, but you know, a busker in England is somebody who plays music on the corner. You know,
Right.
it starts small. There's a little tiny corner, and they're out there doing their thing. And then, you know, in modern times, right, like you still do that, but then it's being streamed on YouTube to 4 people. You
Mhm.
know, and then after that, somebody sees it. And if you're really interesting and really, really good, you know, it might get to another place and get to another place. So there's definitely a snowball effect, but there's a core there, right? And that is deciding to be at least a little bit public about what you do. What I often counsel people is be dramatic. You know, and the reason I say that is I don't mean dramatic like cause all sorts of tension and riff, but there's too much stuff out there that puts you at risk of being anonymous. You cannot be a fly on the wall. There's just no room for uninteresting.
Well, yeah, and the biggest part of that is that you want to engage people, right? I mean, the job of earned media is to engage, to elicit a response. A news release about, you know, your third quarter sales meeting isn't going to get you anywhere, but a release about the 4 things that you do that are really going to charge forward and maybe break the paradigm of, you know, whatever you do in your industry is probably going to allow some interest and to elicit a response and to get media coverage to help you build that trust, that word of mouth, that name. We do have an attendee that is probably going to have some feedback on this. Brian is he's our toy guy, and he's got all kinds of great toys he loves to use,
Yeah,
including
absolutely.
AI and a bunch of other things that I'm sure he might have some feedback on. So, Brian, no problem if you don't want to chat, but I'm going to let you talk, and just to kind of let Frank know that he's now a ability to talk person. So if you want to chat, Brian, and add on to the conversation on earned media, we'd love to have you.
Yeah, well, thanks, guys. Frank, nice to meet you. We haven't met before. But yeah, no, as someone who spent a lot of time in PR myself, as well as I'm kind of a dual hat kind of guy, PR and feedback and evaluation and research, but then I'm the toy guy here. So it's a whole nother realm of fun. But, you know, so I like what you said. I couldn't agree more with you on the whole idea of advertising versus public relations, because too often people get hung up on, yeah, I got to do advertising. Well, you know, as you said, you got to kind of set the table with your growth and get the regular earned media out there. And so I totally like your approach with that. And you're right, it develops celebrity. And I think one of the interesting things is trying to tie in PR and getting the word out with SEO, and trying to tie in some of those techniques to not only do traditional kind of PR work, but to get eyeballs on your content in other ways like SEO. Have you done any work on that area yourself?
Yeah. I mean, you know, SEO is kind of fascinating. Obviously, there's a rather obvious programming component to SEO, and SEO is not cheap by any stretch of the imagination. But the reality is, SEO has to be intimately tied not just to relevant content, but to the concept of a website being an organic marketing tool as opposed to a static tool. Right. And sadly, I'm here to report that, you know, 8 out of 10, maybe 9 out of 10 small businesses, many of these entrepreneurs are sadly convinced that a website is nothing more than a static tool. It's just an electronic business card that just kind of floats out there. And once they pay a web architect to build a website for them, they'll get their secretary or their wife or their daughter to throw some content on, spelling errors and all. And these people will go to their graves believing that that's all they really need to do. So to answer your question, I would argue that if you are in agreement that a website should be organic in nature, then that organic status warrants regular content updates on a weekly, monthly, or quarterly basis. For certain businesses, it may be daily. It depends upon a number of variables. And then once you get there, you've got to tie all of your SEO programming, keyword searches as an example, with the actual content to make your investment in the SEO programming component make sense. How many times have I bumped into a company that's spending God knows what on SEO? Their SEO specialist has been demanding fresh content because he knows that absent fresh content, I don't care what you spend on SEO programming, it has to be tied directly to that content, and that content has to be updated for this to be effective. That's a common obstacle SEO experts run into, is a client that's willing to pay some extraordinary dollars for the service of having their website optimized, but is either unwilling or unable to produce fresh, relevant content. In the absence of that, neuters the effectiveness of the actual SEO. That's a very significant problem in the web architecture world. And if anyone disagrees with me, I'd certainly love to hear it.
Well, no, you're right on, Frank. I mean, that's totally the content. It's driven by content, right? So at the end of the day, if you're building a website and you're just flinging it out there and you're never touching it, or as you say, having somebody maybe throw something up once in a while, you're doing a complete disservice to yourself. Because my clients, I work with a couple on SEO work, and it's weekly blogs, it's updated, fresh content all the time, and that's how we get number 1, number 2, number 3 placements on search. So yeah, I agree with you 100%. A great observation.
Yeah, and I would just go one step further. The illustration I use when I work with my clients is right from the get-go. When I win a web project, I'll just say, hey, I think we have to have a candid conversation about the difference between an organic and a static website. And I want to be honest with you, you've purchased an organic site, and with that, there comes some responsibilities. And I'd like to show you what can happen when there's miscommunication, even between the web architect and the actual client. The reality is, when you build a website and throw it out there and promote it, your prospects and clients will go to that site for the first time. They'll see some gorgeous photos, some neat architecture, kind of a dazzling site. They'll be quite impressed in most cases. A couple of weeks later, they'll go back for visit number 2. Now, what motivates that second visit is the assumption, sadly false in many cases, but the assumption that they're going to see something new, different, and special on that same site. Now, this is a critical juncture in that prospect or client's relationship with this website, because if they go back for visit number 2 and nothing's changed, effectively what has happened is that prospect or client has been conditioned to believe that, oh, you know what, I've seen Bob's site, and the reality is they're likely never going to go back for visit 3. And even when they're prompted to go back for a 3rd visit, they'll only do so very reluctantly. I've seen this happen so many times that what I like to do with my clients is walk them through and paint a picture with them what can happen to a website when your web architect has ambitions to build an organic site, but the client has decided that, well, that organic word sounds a little funky to me. I just want to pay you $5,000, build this site for me, and now I've got better things to do. I think having that conversation that way drives home the point from the prospect and the client's perspective of what happens to any entrepreneur when they refuse to recognize that distinction, and more importantly, when they refuse to provide that content. It really represents the death knell for that site. It frustrates the architect, it frustrates clients and prospects, and it really neuters business growth.
Do you think Frank, with that, or Brian, you can throw in here, let's talk about a business that's doing $7 million a year. Let's just stay there for now, right? Let's kind of, because that's a big population of businesses. There's more $7 million businesses than there are 200 million that are $2 billion businesses. What is the infrastructure that is tangible and usable for a business of that side, where they can do PR right, they can do their website right? And here's why I'm asking the questions. A lot of times people who are in our side of the world, we're tasked with, we got to bring solutions to the table that work. And they're like, you're giving me a solution that works for a $20 million business. That's not me. You're giving me a solution that, IBM uses. That's not me. How do you help clients like, okay, this fits for me at my size, because I can't afford the big thing, right? But at the same time, they have to have earned media. They have to have a website that is SEO friendly. They have to have a website that does change. And oftentimes it just stops before it even starts. What counsel, Brian or Frank, what counsel do you give clients to get them there, which isn't a budget buster?
Yeah, I was going to say I can probably respond to that. A lot of how I approach this is I say, well, hey, at $7 million per year, the reality is you should have a press release going out on a regular monthly basis. That press release should be archived on the actual site. If you're working with a media and public relations professional of my acumen, it would be my responsibility to come up with that content, not yours. That's a major stumbling block for a lot of these clients. They understand the philosophy behind what we're talking about, but they stumble over, well, I don't know if I can come up with something every month. Well, my response is, if you've hired an expert like myself, the onus of responsibility for developing that content shouldn't fall on your shoulders as the client. It should fall on mine. Secondarily,
that's an important distinction, because a lot of times they'll look at that and say, Frank, here's our sell sheet. Go turn it into PR. No one gives a client shit, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have to come up with something that people want. I know you want to get your sales information out there. I know you want that. That's the business. But on your side, what does the reader want? What does the audience want? Are they dying for your one pager with your price points? Or are they dying for something more? Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. I was going to say, from the client perspective, how about the idea of taking your client satisfaction and loyalty program, sharing the results of those interactions through an objective third party right on your website, and even making that data available to demonstrate that your 94.6% satisfaction rate is not a fictitious number that your web architect came up with on a Friday afternoon, but rather is the result of an actual study that an objective third party put together, and you can look at the data yourself. Why are there not case studies and client testimonials? A case study being defined as how a particular company came about utilizing your products and or services in this is the problem, this is the solution, this is the result sort of a format, but then complementing those case studies with client testimonials, actual comments, observations, anecdotes about that client's experience utilizing that product and or service. I think that's absolutely critical. More importantly, why aren't these websites postured as conduits through which valuable information about the entire industry can be derived? Let me give you an example. Let's use the Drudge Report, which is really just a news scoop site.
Yep.
Well, if you've ever been to the Drudge Report, this has got to be one of the ugliest websites ever created.
Yeah.
It's a white background. It's black links. The website itself looks terrible, but the traffic that website gets is off the charts, and you have to ask yourself, what is basically causing that? Well, the reason people go to drudge.com is not to get the news. That's not why people go to Drudge. The reason people go to Drudge is they understand that they are going to see content, okay, that would never make it past the editors of the mainstream media on any other site. In other words, not only are you going to see information that wouldn't appear on other sites, but you'll see this 2 hours, 2 days, sometimes 2 weeks prior to this information being released on some of these other sites. Now, let's use the example of what the Drudge Report is within the journalistic world. Okay, and let's translate that. Let's distill that down to where an entrepreneur should be with their website. Rather than providing information about your company and your products and or services, why not have an industry news section whereupon you are covering different industry happenings throughout your particular vertical? Now, when your clients go to your website, they will quickly be conditioned to go, well, wait a minute, this isn't just about Joe's company. Look at this industry news section. You know what? I'm going to bookmark this. because whenever I need to figure out what's going on in my industry, wow, this is a really condensed, really neat way to give me a snapshot of what's going on. And if that conduit just happens to be on your website, in my estimation, that's exactly what our fantasies are as it relates to our websites. We want our websites to be so compelling, so meaningful, and so relevant that our clients and prospects are actually bookmarking them. Now, what would compel that? Potentially, they could be enamored with your products and services. That would be the most obvious explanation. But I'll be honest with you, most people bookmark sites not because they're enamored with specific products and or services. Most people bookmark sites because they're looking for reliable conduits to gather valid and reliable information. And I hate to say it, it pains me to say it, but the credibility of journalists is just barely above the credibility of members of Congress.
Yeah,
The
which is great.
Yeah,
it's all the pay-per-click world, right? So we're back to advertising, right? If you're going for eyeballs, and that's all about you. And I think what you just keyed on that I really want to make sure that everyone that's watching this takes home is you only get bookmarked by being useful and helpful to that person. Nobody's bookmarking because it's a website all about you. It's like, oh, I really like, Bob's House of Pancakes.com because it talks about how many years Bob's been in business. Nobody ever does that. They link to it because of the recipes that you have. I must be hungry because I'm talking about food all the time. But the thing that you do for your customer, the problem that you solve, the resources that you offer that help them figure something out or move them forward in their journey is what people value and why they're going to bookmark you and why they'll come back.
And I would parlay one other thing there too, that ties into your LinkedIn presence, right?
Yeah.
So, as for us fractionals here, right? At the end of the day, you guys know this who know me, I put out a daily news story in the food industry because I spent a lot of time in that industry. And people then, I hear all the time from people, hey, I saw that news about X or Y or Z on your LinkedIn, feed. And so people continue to follow me because I'm going to be that reliable industry source of, what's going on. And they know that I'm going to, breaking news, they're going to see it there. So I think we can use that as fractionals in the same way that Frank was talking about for companies. We can use that as individuals to build our own web presence, if you will, on LinkedIn and on our websites and other places too. And the other thing I wanted to just tag on to was, I love what you said, Frank, about the whole feedback quotient and, sharing the results of the feedback that you collect. Not only is that good to draw people to you as a new customer basis, but with customer retention, sharing what you actually did based on what you heard from your customers. It's one of the things in my book, right? I mean, that's what you got to do. And that's extremely valuable. So good point on that as well.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah, one thing I like to drive home on this particular topic, and the reality is, I think if more entrepreneurs understood this, they would be clamoring to reach out to gentlemen like myself. And I don't say that in a braggadocious manner, but let me make my point, and then you can determine the efficacy of my last comment here. The reality is, as entrepreneurs, we rarely learn from our successes. Most of our learning as entrepreneurs, and I would argue as people, come from the oversights, the mistakes, the omissions, the things that we have ignored. And the reality is, when you have a competent client satisfaction and loyalty program ran by someone of my acumen, and then you're using that as a vehicle to establish credibility and to add relevant content to your site, what you're doing as an entrepreneur is you're recognizing one fundamental point. And that point is, very rarely do we learn from our successes. We learn from our failures. And if that's true, if I'm right about that, a business that isn't running a client satisfaction and loyalty program is effectively a business that is so distracted with their success that they never explore their failures. And let me back this up with a scientific study, and then I'll let you guys tell me that I've effectively lost my mind on this point. A gentleman back in 2014, so this is older, looked at the Fortune 500 in 1950, and he compared it to the Fortune 500 list in 2014. And his expectation was that, 8 or 9, God forbid, maybe even 10 out of 10 of the companies that were on the Fortune 500 list in 1950 are still going to be there. In other words, Fortune 500 companies, largely due to advertising, and I don't want to throw dirt at advertisers, but largely due to advertising, they've painted this picture of being sort of this impregnable, this invincible group of business organizations. Well, would you believe that 88%, almost 9 out of 10 businesses appearing on the Fortune 500 list in 1950 were not on the list in 2014? Now, what's the lesson here? The lesson here is the roller coaster that all 4 of us are riding right now as entrepreneurs and small business people. I got a newsflash for you. Contrary to what all the Super Bowl ads might lead you to believe, these Fortune 500 companies are riding that same roller coaster, but the difference is the valleys and the hills are steeper and deeper. And what I would finish with, and then I'll let you guys come after me here, is this is not my opinion. This has been empirically demonstrated. So if that's true, why doesn't everyone that owns a business call up someone like Frank Costabilo? I didn't come on this program to toot my own horn. That's not what this is about. But why aren't they contacting a competent professional like myself and saying, Frank, we're interested in learning from our mistakes and holding ourselves accountable. We're really interested in hiring you. Why isn't every company doing it?
I don't think you're crazy, Frank. I think that's coming, to be honest with you. And here's why I think that is. A lot of businesses in the last year for sure, but even more than that since the pandemic, they are taking a good, hard look on how they do things on so many fronts, right? And what they're getting, they might be looking at their talent, they might be looking at how they achieve their goals, all of that. What they're getting is a big shot of humility across all of that. So for example, if you're trying to hire, and it used to have this mentality where you're lucky to work here, that's gone, that's dead. You have to be humble, and you are humbled, and that's actually really, really healthy. It's just like failing, right? It's you have to fail in order to get. There are also these tools that business, particularly small business sector, things like EOS. They're using these tools that's basically forcing, accountability and humility onto them. I just don't think it was part of our culture before, our work culture, our business culture, our growth culture. It was very much top down. It's not that way anymore. It's much more democratic. It's much more it's, there's accountability and honesty and vulnerability. These are becoming part of the work culture. I think what you're talking about is coming. And I think in many ways it's here. Those who are succeeding are vulnerable and say, Frank, I need to learn something I don't know. You guys remember like in our younger careers, like somebody at the top had it all figured out and we were just the gears that made it all happen. That was our role. And that world, dead, gone, no longer part of the world we live in. The dynamics have changed too much. So I think this next year, of course, I'm Mr. Optimistic. Everybody knows that. But this next year is going to launch so much innovation and new ideas and new energy and new money because people have been humbled and are embracing it. Now that's a big concept, but I'm seeing evidence of it every single day.
Good. Well, again, I would certainly welcome that. Given the companies that I work with, I'll occasionally bump into someone that really gets it and is real excited about pursuing something like this. I hate to admit it, a disproportionate number of small businesses, quite honestly, and I've had people admit this to me, are somewhat concerned and almost afraid of what that exercise might uncover. And that tells me a lot more about their business than maybe I wanted to know.
Well, yeah, you talk to Roger Sherping and Tim Ellis and all these EOS and operators and COO fractionals and all that. There's sort of been the long thing. The problem is always in the corner office.
Right.
It's leadership sometimes struggles, but with leadership saying, listen, I can't force an answer here. I can't grind my way to growth here. I have to open up. I have to listen. I have to operate differently. And that's kind of here and coming. The American work culture from leadership and through people is on the biggest precipice of change it has ever been on. And because what's happening is you're getting to a point where, okay, if you're not going to be vulnerable, if you're not going to be honest, if you're not going to be accountable, you're going to be dead. Your business is going to be no more. And if you decide to go down that path and you might go, screw it, then I'm going to sell. Well, guess what? You're also going to get a very low valuation. The point is, there's no upside in not being vulnerable. There's no upside in not learning. There's no upside in not doing things different than you had before. You're gonna shrink your world of opportunity. Take the flip side, use what's happening in the world right now, be humble with your staff, be honest with how you operate, be accountable. Quite honestly, those are things that have not been part of the American work culture since before World War II.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, if we had more time, we could use the American automobile industry as a case study to illustrate what happens when one of your major competitors pioneers something called Kaizen, and actually, come hell or high water, integrates Kaizen into their manufacturing plants to the degree. Now, let's think about this. This is a wonderful place for us to end here. Where the American automobile manufacturers in the 70s and 80s were focused on volume and sales. And the idea of allowing one of their line workers to draw attention to a problem, to have that entire line stop, and to have that line not move again, whether it's for days or weeks until that problem is solved, that concept was completely foreign to American automobile manufacturers in the 70s and 80s. In fact, statistically, back in the 80s, the average American car had 36 defects off of the line. The average Japanese car, by comparison, had 0. Now, when people hear me say that, they say, gosh, Frank, that sounds, kind of hard to believe. I mean, 0, give me a break. Well, it's only after you understand Kaizen and how the Japanese integrated that into their manufacturing methodology. They'd have some little guy named, Wu Jing working on, one of 1,200 different platforms. And Wu Jing's a bright kid, maybe 21 years old. He sees that there's a bolt that is 1/4 of an inch out of place that could potentially leave a panel in a precarious spot. He grabs that rope, he yanks it. In a Japanese manufacturing plant, the entire line stops. The supervisors come over, hey, what's going on here? Well, look at this. That line, I don't care if it's several hours, several days, it could be several weeks. That line doesn't start again until that problem is solved. And the reality is, until we get to that point in this society, and I don't want to pick on the automobile manufacturers, I would argue this should be ubiquitously integrated into our culture. Until we get there, I got to be honest with you, competing at the global level and competing earnestly and being truly successful, it's going to be very difficult.
Well, definitely, that is a good segue for. We're clearly going to have Frank back and talk about something else on that. And I also want to do a little bit of business here before we close. First of all, thank you, Frank, for being Frank. I don't know if you've ever heard that before, but there it is.
Thousands of times, but thank you.
You've been a great guest and have a lot of value and shared a lot of great stuff. So we look forward to having you back. Dave, I'm going to do a couple of business things here, if you don't mind.
Yep.
So as you know, as a small independent business, everybody, you do need to network. I'm going to do a little plug here for 2 important things coming up. I was with Patrick Donahue this week, who's at Hill Capital, and they do 1 million cups. So if you want to get around entrepreneurs and startups and ideas and, non-boring stuff, look at 1millioncups.com or .org, whatever, 1 Million Cups Twin Cities. There's an Eden Prairie chapter. They meet every Wednesday. And boy, what a good environment just to be in to learn, see where other people's fail and places to learn. So 1 Million Cups is there. And then guess what? December 1st, December 1st, the Club E gets back in person at the Minneapolis Club. I'm on a panel with somebody from Upwork and Kathy Sadaka, and we're talking about all things fractional and the change. So if you have not been doing in-person networking or going to events, you can start doing it again. Those are 2 layups for anybody to jump into. So, and then Dave, so I just wanted to get that in there for everybody here and everybody listening to be sure to get out because the time is right. Dave, what else we got?
Well, let's finish the promo party with a couple of upcoming events that we've got. We're switching up our calendar a little bit, folks. So if you're used to Fridays, every Friday, things are changing. We're going to take next week off. Next Friday is off for office hours, and we're switching to every other week. So on October 14th, we have Steps for Sustainable Growth in 2023 with Marianne Lombardi. And 2 weeks later, we have Branding Strategies with Pete Steege. And then we're going to keep filling those out, and I can't wait to keep them up with you. Meantime, also next week, Brian, I'm actually inviting you directly to this one. I am hosting a webinar on Wednesday, October 5th. Avoid shiny object syndrome. The tech stack that will drive revenue. So I'm looking forward to seeing lots of folks there. And do tune in to busyweb.com/events. And that's where we've got all of our stuff. I've got HubSpot user groups coming up. I've got Google events coming up and all kinds of fun stuff. But this is all about keeping up with the community, and we're trying to give as much value back as we get from all of our members. So thank you all very much for hanging out with us, and we can't wait to see you next time. Frank, thanks again. And Brian, thanks for your contributions. John, as always.
Yeah.
To be a part of you on this.
What a day.